And we're live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to episode, I think I'm on 22 of the Wake Up podcast. And this is episode 2 of the Bitcoin Time series, where I am interviewing the writers and contributors for initially the Bitcoin Times edition 3. And then later on, I'll do actually Bitcoin Times edition 2 because I count backwards, apparently. I've got Erik Cason with me, who is genuinely one of my favorite writers and one of my favorite thinkers in the space. I remember reading, I think I read, can't remember which piece it was, but the first piece I read from you was back in probably October, November last year. And I was just really, really impressed at just the way you write, and then also how you're able to, articulate just this concept of sovereignty and liberty and individuality so well. So I'll let you do a better introduction of yourself, but really, first and foremost, thank you for coming on the show, and yeah, I'll throw it over to you.
Sure. Thank you very much for having me and letting me contribute to Bitcoin Times. I've really appreciated it as a publication. So my name is Erik Cason. I've been involved in the Bitcoin space since about 2012. I worked at Coinbase from 2013 to 2017, where I really kind of learned much more in depth and detail about Bitcoin. And then when I left, I started writing at cryptosovereignty.org. And my real focus was explicitly on, I wanted to kind of understand the political theory and the ideas of sovereignty that were really allowing for Bitcoin to function in this much higher capacity. And so you can find a number of my essays at cryptosovereignty.org. In addition to, I've wrote a lot of different guest blog posts and articles for variations. And this most recent one is called Bitcoin in the State of Emergency. And a large part of the influence that I get from this is from several philosophers, but I'd say probably the primary one who's the most influential would be Carl Schmitt, who was actually a German jurist who developed a lot of pretty extreme ideas around sovereignty. And to me, the most important aspect of it was this idea of the legal predication of what this state of emergency is. And it's interesting because I actually opened the article with a quote from Walter Benjamin, who I don't know if you'd call him a peer of Schmitt's, but they were in dialogue with one another, and Walter Benjamin had a lot of respect for Carl Schmitt because of his development of his ideas around stuff such as political theology and how the state of emergency functions. And so in this article, I try to essentially point out that like right now, we exist in a state of emergency, not just because of coronavirus, but on a wider level, the way that the state itself has been able to take extraordinary powers over us to such a way that they can unilaterally declare anybody they want an enemy of the state and then deprive them of habeas corpus, or the ability to ever meet with any kind of encounter with the law. And Walter Benjamin offers kind of a pretty extreme critique of saying that, like, the real state of emergency is like our realization that our law has been subsumed by the state vis-a-vis these capacities of the state of emergency. And that through our recognition of it as such, we can then implement our own state of emergency that, like, truly is the crisis of the state that can cause it to collapse.
Interesting. I love that notion of inversion. So I guess my first question here was actually going to be to better define that opening statement, but I assume that sort of idea of the inversion of the state of emergency is effectively what that opening statement is, right?
Yeah, and later in the article too, I actually frame up, there's like a lot of really great and poignant like German legal words that serve towards it. And it's really like, it is this inversion of that, like, through the recognition of the state of emergency, we can implement our own true state of emergency that causes for a real crisis with the law. And in my mind, Bitcoin's the absolute apex of that, because it's actually fundamentally attacking the blood source and food source of the state, i.e. fiat money.
Yes. So okay. So while we're on this point, then, so why is that a good thing, to enact the state of emergency upon the state?
Well, I'd say first of all, they they made the decision on their own to unilaterally break the social contract with us. And so a lot of my work also revolves around Thomas Hobbes and his original theories. Thomas Hobbes and Leviathan was really kind of the first presentation of political theory. And in it, there's a great quote from Hobbes where he says, like true sovereign power essentially is the ability to create safety and security in a way that no other possible power can create. And if the sovereign can't deliver that kind of safety and security, well, that's a convent that can never actually be relinquished. And ergo, if they can't do that, they're not actually the sovereign. And when we look at Bitcoin and the way that cryptography protects us and allows for us to keep our wealth self-sovereign and outside of the bounds of the state, we can actually see it delivers a promise of safety and security that the state can no longer fulfill. And in fact, that when the state contrasts itself against it, it wants to both attack and destroy it, which also goes to show how weak it truly is, because as you and I both know, it would be impossible for them to destroy Bitcoin at this point in time. So to me, and that also goes back to why my website's crypto sovereignty, is that vis-a-vis cryptography, we now have these totally new powers that offer us a protection that's above and beyond the state. And as the state comes to realize this, they're going to attack us and try to destroy this, which is going to cause for an escalation of the conflict to such a place where not only is the state going to enter into a full crisis where it won't be able to stop it, but through attacking it, other people will come to realize what Bitcoin has to offer. They'll choose to convert their own storage of wealth and subjection of what kind of money they want to store value in. And that will then cause for a debasing of the state. And eventually, in my mind, I truly hope that it'll allow for the state to fully collapse, because it can no longer service all of its debt burdens that it's been doing so through infinite money creation.
Indeed, it's the Streisand effect in action. You know, I've always I actually funny. I only found out what the word or what the term Streisand effect means a couple months ago. You know, I used to have this metaphor where I said, you know, the state is something that it's grasping individuals and humans in its grip, and the harder it squeezes, the more we slip out of its grip. And in its death throes, all it can do is grip harder. And it's one of those things. It's like, if it lets go, it loses, and if it squeezes harder, it has the illusion that it's holding on, but in fact it's squeezing us out even harder. So it's like they're stuck. They don't have an option. And I think, like you said, is Bitcoin in many ways is the stake that's driven into the heart of the state, because it really does cut that bloodline, that lifeline for the state, because it is the parasite that purely exists off the back of our, I guess, call it our acceptance of its existence, and or our ignorance to its existence in a state of emergency, which is a profound thing. So I guess then, what maybe let's go into origins here before I go into any of these other questions about the actual article itself. Is what was your journey toward I guess, people like you and I can agree on a lot of things, but maybe to normal people we sound quite radical. It's like, oh, look at these fucking maniacs, they're anarchists, they want to see the state fall over, we're all going to die if the state falls over. So what was your kind of journey like? If you look back on yourself and how you viewed the world maybe 5, 10, 15 years ago or whatever, like where did it come from, and what was sort of, maybe you can talk me through some of the breadcrumbs of sort of how you got to where you are now, because we don't all start like this.
Sure. Yeah. So let's see, in mid 2000s, I started going to university in San Francisco, and I grew up in a very liberal culture, so I was pretty far left at that point in time. And I identified maybe as like a far left socialist or something at the point in time. Graduated university in 2008. Couldn't find work after that. Worked at a number of kind of fledgling startups doing bullshit that I didn't care about. And then 2010, I think I decided to go back to graduate school. I wanted to become a therapist. And I
What
actually
sort
was
of
in a
therapist?
dual.
Like psychotherapist or?
Yeah, I wanted to be a psychotherapist because I'm like a mushy, touchy-feely guy. And specifically, actually, I really wanted to help men that were struggling, like essentially with dating and like their inability to be able to have enough confidence to like meet women. But ironically, I enrolled in a dual degree program to be a school counselor too, because I felt passionate about wanting to help kids and education. So I went into that program and I found out like it was just this absolute fucking nightmare of bureaucracy, and really misguided, like kind of hurting kids because they wouldn't comply with whatever was expected with them. And as I was doing this, I also like started to go into a bipolar cycle where I was getting more manic. And this happened to align with the Occupy movement. So this all sort of like fused into a single thing where like I'm kind of in this manic episode and I'm like, oh, like we can like change everything, like through the collective, we can like use Occupy to like make the state do what we want it to do. And it was a really misled idea. It was really after I was there for a week or two that I started to realize how unorganized and pie in the sky this idea was, and how unserving it was. And as I kind of came to this realization, I started to down cycle too into like this terrible depression where like nothing could make me happy. I was extremely depressed. So I came away from the Occupy movement feeling really crushed. And this idea of far left socialism really left a bad taste in my mouth. And somehow through the Occupy movement, somebody told me about Bitcoin. And that planted the seed there. I didn't immediately jump in and start reading it. But over the next few months, kind of as I descended deeper and deeper into my depression, I realized money was obviously like the key issue that we somehow had to get under control. And as I investigated it further and further, Bitcoin popped up a few more times and I started to investigate it more. And then there wasn't really like this key moment, but I think over my investigation over the next few months, I really convinced myself like, oh, this is the right move. So then by 2012, that's when I started to like dip my toe in. I started using the red phone at like Longs or Payless or wherever to like send money to Mount Gox. And I didn't have one time, so I was just sending maybe like $100 or $200, like buying a coin or two here or there. Yeah, and like as I remember, then there was this particular place where I was like wondering about all of this. I was like, how the fuck does this like internet money fulfill this promise that like the state doesn't seem to be able to fulfill, like no institution can. And that was kind of the beginning of my philosophical journey where I discovered
which promise do you mean? Which promise would it fulfill that the state couldn't?
The fact that it can't inflate the money supply, and that if it doesn't have access to my private keys, it can't steal it from me. Because I had worked in banking for a bit where like my literally to like seize people's bank accounts because the cops called us up and was like, hey, like, could you guys this guy from doing any banking? And we're like, yeah, sure thing. And that kind of scared me because I was like, don't we need like a warrant for that? And they're like, oh no, like the police are our friends. If they ask us to do stuff, we do it
We
for
do
them.
it, yeah. So what was just out of curiosity? So obviously, going to Occupy, and sort of then, I guess, having the the ability to recognize that money was part of the fundamental problem, and then even linking Bitcoin as a potential solution there. Can you relate those two realizations to some sort of prior thread? Like, so for example, me, I've always been an entrepreneur. I've always been very, personally responsible. I moved out when I was very young. I had an uncle who, when I was younger, really inspired me towards like, our favorite movie together was Braveheart, and and that sort of idea of freedom has always inspired me. So I kind of had these ingredients, and that sort of led me, to the next breadcrumb. And I remember watching Zeitgeist, Peter Joseph stuff back in the day, and that sort of opened up other things. So that was sort of around the
Tragic
Occupy
with that.
time, obviously. Huh?
Oh, with Peter, just him, like
Oh,
Bitcoin
I
just going
know, I
totally
know,
over his head.
I know, fucking
Bummer.
ridiculous. So there was these breadcrumbs for me that, and I can sort of relate those back. So what do you think interested you, like, in sort of Occupy and things like that back then? Like, what was that? Can you put a finger on that?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. I think one is I studied international relations at university, which kind of gave me international relations and history. So I was well aware historically of what had happened when the state got out of control, the effects of hyperinflation in Germany after World War One and its influences going to World War Two. In addition to, like, I've traveled quite extensively. I've been to like 50 something countries and spent, like
Well,
2 years out of the United States. And yeah, just seeing how other people lived in poverty, having them witness the real direct totalitarian and tyranny that happens in places like I remember in 2008, I was in Burma and I was in an ice cream shop and I watched this general come in and like shake down this woman and like steal all of her money. And it was like a very like cordial interaction. There was like no violence or anything, but it was, after he left, she like sobbed her eyes out. And so I was left with this real impression that like the power can be abused in these really extreme ways. And then also from being in international relations, I had to write a thesis for university that was like a 60-page paper that was about the East Asian financial crisis. So that gave me a real good background in economics and the way that the mismanagement of money could have these severe and catastrophic global effects. So I think a lot of that really primed me for, by the
yeah,
time Occupy came on and they had this dialogue of the 1% versus the 99%, and the appeal of understanding that like this oligarchic landscape that we live in is fundamentally facilitated by the state. And I think it was only through the Occupy movement and both seeing how fledgling it was and how what's the word I want, I guess, fantastical kind of about how their
hmm
ideas were going to work. Like we pressure the government and they like make good choices and help us out. Like witnessing cops, like I think another experience in that was I was in Philadelphia and I literally had police like beat the shit out of me on top of the Freedom to Assemble Memorial in
yeah,
Philadelphia.
well,
And I remember like having this moment, like as he's like hitting me his truncheon, like I'm literally on top of the memorial for like the freedom of assembly and they're like beating me. And I was like, there's something really, really wrong here.
yeah, wow, fuck,
Yeah, and like, I was pretty depressed at that point, and I came away being like, there's something really, really wrong here. And like us going out in the street and, causing a ruckus is not making any difference. And in fact, it's probably really upsetting people in a way that I don't fully understand. So yeah, after I came away from that, it took me a good year to kind of get myself back up on my feet. And with being back up on my feet, like I worked at a moving company just doing hard labor for a while.
yep,
And after
yep,
that,
yep.
it was working as like a temp at some law firm doing super bullshit work for them. But it was good insofar that uh, I realized I don't want to do this for the rest of my life because this is horrible. And B, it really gave me the start investigating Bitcoin and being like, is this an actual real exit? And I remember as I
hmm
investigated it more and more, like because I had just gone through this manic cycle, I could feel like threads of that kind of dig into me again, of me being like, maybe Bitcoin could change everything. Like maybe this is the actual answer. Like maybe
mm
maybe if there's some way we can get around all of this, it can kind of change everything. And through the end of 2012 and into 2013, that dialogue built more and more and more with me until eventually, I reached out to Coinbase. I interviewed for a role that I didn't get. And then a couple months later, Olaf reached back out to me. He was like, hey, we really need help. Do you want to come on board? And I was just like, yeah, absolutely. And as much, Coinbase has become an absolute catastrophe and shit show.
hmm
And not to say that it went way before, but like the altcoinery bullshit really was a devastating, in my opinion.
Yep.
But with that being said, early on in Coinbase, like there was a lot of crypto anarchists and a lot of people that were there with similar value sets
I
that
can imagine.
I got to have a lot of really profound and fantastic dialogue with them. In addition to the fact that, you know, today sitting here talking about it, it's too bad to think of some of the people that I had encounters with who, I don't want to say they betrayed the ethos of Bitcoin, but I think they really got lost along the way, kind of in shitcoinery and other things, which in some ways I feel like it's sort of a cycle people have to go through in order to really come back to Bitcoin and have a full understanding of, oh, like the Promethean creation of a totally new kind of money is like a one-time thing, and it doesn't matter if you duplicate it, it's just a duplicate.
Yeah, actually, there's two threads I want to pull on there. Is, you know, one, you know, how either you avoided the same path of shitcoinery, and if you did, or whether you went through that cycle very quickly, unlike others who seem to get stuck in that cycle. Because I know me personally, I came in via Bitcoin, you know, and I found it quite interesting, and then, you know, sort of the Ethereum sort of allure dragged me a little bit, and, you know, the more I dug into Ethereum, you know, I kind of came full circle very quickly, because I just found Ethereum so abhorrent, to what Bitcoin represented. Like, everything I discovered in Ethereum just felt like more fiat to me. So I came full circle very, very quickly. So one question is, you know, how you managed to avoid that, or how, you know, what helped you come full circle. And then B, and we'll dig into this secondarily, is how your understanding or appreciation or perception of Bitcoin as a tool for the separation, say, of money and state, or as a tool for individual sovereignty, has evolved from those early Coinbase days to now. So let's hit the
Yeah,
first one.
so I think particularly people who kind of went through the initial storm of shitcoinery, whether it was 1.0 or 2.0, because 1.0, you know, it's pure coin and like all these other things that don't really even exist anymore. And so I flirted with some of those. You know, I really liked pure coin because I was sold on this idea of proof of stake, because I didn't have a full understanding of proof of work or really how like it was influencing energy markets on a whole. And then when Ethereum came along, I think I bit the same thread that everybody else did with like, ooh, like world computer turning complete, blah, blah, blah bullshit. You know, and essentially we were all buying into hopium. And then for me, I think when I watched the Dow disaster kind of go down and see how quickly and efficiently Vitalik and crew were able to mitigate that quote unquote disaster, it became very apparent to me that it wasn't centralized at all. So like now I was at least questioning, and over the next few months, as I watched more of this ICO stuff happen, the frenzied, you know, get an ICO of, you know, Gnosis or whatever coin was coming out, it became very apparent to me that like this, like there wasn't real innovation here. Like this was a bunch of hope getting sold. And I remember kind of the final, kind of like the end of me believing that there was something that could replace Bitcoin or really offer something substantial beyond it, was there was like an unofficial meeting that we were having with a bunch of people at Coinbase where we were all talking about different investments and shit. And I asked everybody else like who does their accounting in fiat and who does it in Bitcoin? And like I was like one of the only people who raised their hand about Bitcoin. And I was like, wait, like you guys are all just trying to like get more dollars? And they were like, yeah, of course. And I was like, oh Jesus. And that's when I really started to walk away. And you know, as much as I hate on shitcoinery and I believe that, you know, people should have the majority of their wealth in Bitcoin, I do think there's some innovation going on. I do think there is some capacity for something new and different to be developed. But I think it's a really big mistake to try to say these things have any equality or of towards Bitcoin, in addition to the fact that these guys have any sort of real monetary standard or supply issuance that could make it real money. So at the end of the day, I say, look, if you're interested in shitcoinery, that's your own business. Really investigate it thoroughly, because when you get your fingers chopped off, you're going to be pretty upset at yourself. But with that being said, maybe I'm mistaken, you know? There's been plenty of people that have made a lot of Bitcoin by flipping through shitcoin. And if you can do it and not chop off your fingers, great for you. I'm a big fan of free markets and making that happen. And then to address your secondary point, I mean, to me, part of my thesis with Bitcoin for a long time has been like it is fundamentally an object and a tool of war. And it's a fundamentally an object and tool of war because of the cryptography that's baked into it at a base level, the way that Satoshi Nakamoto deployed it, you know, and furthermore, the history of other people trying to create digital money, such as the e-gold scheme, and the way that, you know, that guy was hunted down and, you know, thrown in jail for, I think, like 30 years or some shit. He's still rotting there, I believe.
Ridiculous.
It is, and to me, that's when I so on I recognized that this was like a tool for this generalized ontology of war, and that Satoshi Nakamoto, by the way he kept himself anonymous, that was a very, very important feature. And so I realized that as the state, and seeing the way that e-gold failed, I realized that the state would try to attack at a point in time, and they wouldn't have anywhere to kind of gain a foothold within that attack. And so it became very clear to me that this was a very, very powerful object that could challenge the state's ability and authority. And then from my background in economics and international relations, there's this idea of Gramsci's law. Are you familiar with Gramsci's law?
Gramsci's or Gresham's? Where my
Gresham's law. I'm sorry, I mispronounce everything, so you'll have to.
Yeah.
But essentially, because I read stuff and then I don't talk with people about it. So Gresham's law, with the idea of, you know, the good money pushes out the bad, and how we subjectively choose one thing to save with and another to spend with. Well, I realized if Bitcoin has this fixed supply, like this is really just a waiting game to see where the inflation game goes. Because we saw in 2008, the same way that they tried to influence the financial system, which today saying it, that what happened in 2008 absolutely pales into comparison of what we've seen this year, really prepared me to see what was going to happen this year. And furthermore, having watched the development of all of this, like, in my opinion, Bitcoin's almost like this hilarious vaudeville skit of where, like, we've been very open about everything that it's going to do and how it's going to change everything and why it's going to happen. Like the state shows up and like does every single thing we say it's going to do.
We
like,
say, yeah, exactly.
Like unilaterally print out tons of money to give to its friends and family, and meanwhile, like fucking you, like that's what it's going to do. And then they do that, you know. And each time we go through the cycle too, I find it hilarious of how, particularly people that like got into Bitcoin in maybe the last 3 or 4 years, how as Bitcoin's you know, going parabolic now, there's this like flirting with shitcoinery that, you know, I think all of us who were in the cycle before that, we did our flirting with shitcoinery, purged ourselves of that, and now they're sort of going through that cycle. So it's really fascinating me to see like the general psychology that's going on. And to me, it's been one of the deeper philosophical influences that has me believe that something truly metaphysical is going on here, because of the way that like Bitcoin seems to sincerely engage in a true ontology of man about what it means to have an object of wealth and power that can't be violently extracted from one another anymore. And to me, like that, I'm reading this book I'm reading this book the second time through right now, Heidegger's The Question Concerning Technology. And it's a very difficult read, but I'm realizing like he's making an argument in it that technology itself is this ontological that man engages in that has this extreme danger to trap us, which, as we can see where the panopticon is powerful the state is, that's true. But he also talks about how there's this turning, that there's the saving power is also located in technology. And to me, if we trace the concourse of like what cryptography has been throughout all of human history, like it makes sense that it would be delivered through technology, that we would get this money that would be created through cryptography. And furthermore, that like it can radically alter the human landscape in a way that none of us could have ever foretold before. Like it all makes sense to me through this kind of philosophical dialogue that, you know, I've really kind of been in like an 8-year journey just trying to figure all of this shit out.
And do you feel like in that journey, because I know for myself personally, when I first came into it, like there was these threads that interested me, because I traded through the 2008 crash. So I sort of saw that. And then I was an early gold silver bug in sort of 2010, 11, 12. And then, I remember watching Max Kaiser jumping up and down on a couch, talking about, buying gold, silver and all this sort of stuff. So I kind of had these threads, but I would argue that probably in the last 2 years more than anything, and particularly for the last 18 months, you know, Bitcoin's revolutionary nature, or I love how you just termed it, like as a tool of war. That sort of really engaged me more than anything else, even in the early days. Like I've got a meme that I made up a little while ago, which is I came for the money, and I stayed for the money. And the difference between that is kind of, I came to make more dollars, but I've stayed because this is how, like, through this reinvention or reincarnation of money, we change fucking everything. And 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 for me, yeah, I would probably say the last 2 years, and I mean this year's really radicalized me. But do you think your viewpoint of Bitcoin as a tool of war has accelerated more recently, or do you think it's sort of been a more linear progression for you from the beginning?
Uh, it has been a more linear progression. However, my own dialogue and conviction about it has really accelerated in the last 18 months, just because I've been putting myself out there more, having
Mm,
a lot more reflection given to me. And frankly, like, I've sort of realized that like Bitcoin is the shilling point for like the global civil war against all fiat monetary systems. And so like right now, essentially you, me, all of these other guys that are involved in having dialogue in the system, producing content, like we fundamentally are the revolutionary vanguard that is
hmm
pushing forward this revolution in a very powerful way. And having what price happen, all of the development around the community, all of the different fronts that we have engaged, it's really accelerated my own theory, essentially, like of this being an object and tool of war, because uh like first of all, like the state still doesn't get what's going on, which is like really funny.
hmm
And then
hmm
furthermore, like, and this is part of the beautiful dance of everything that's going on that I love so much, is that uh like I love shitcoinery for how loud and distracting it has been from Bitcoin. Cause like
hmm
meanwhile, like they're pulling the horse into Troy, and like we're quietly sitting inside knowing what's gonna happen after their big celebration of rolling out blockchain and USDC coin and deploying their Panopticon. That like we're gonna pop out and slaughter the shit out of them afterwards.
hmm
But
hmm
because they're so distracted with blockchain this and crypto that and shitcoin this, that they don't even see what's going on. Even though we've told them, like, Bitcoin is this revolutionary object, you can't control it, you can't stop it, it has anarchist origins. They're like, yeah, whatever. And we're like, dude, you guys should be warned. Like, you can't stop this. They're like we're the state. Like, fuck you. We can do whatever we want. And we're like, all right, like, we'll see what happens, and like with watching the SEC go after Ripple, it's very
hmm
apparent to me, like anywhere that there's like a real physical actor, like that person can be hunted down and hurt or manipulated or whatever in order to try to change the whole dynamics. And I remember Nick Carter and I at one of the blockchain conferences, I think in 2018, we were like talking, and like Vitalik was like sitting like across the way, like with his friends and stuff. And I was like, look, my big problem is, how much money would I make right now if I shorted Ethereum and threw Vitalik off the balcony over here? And I'm
hmm
not saying I
hmm
would do
hmm
that, but like that's a very real security hole.
Yep.
Furthermore, I have to ask, like he's met with people like I think he met with Xi Jinping. I know he met with Putin and other people, but how much has that influenced him?
Yes.
Like, that's part of the beauty of how Satoshi Nakamoto has handled all of this, like as um, the author of all of this, and in one way we could even say that maybe he is the dictator of Bitcoin, and this relates back to the Roman idea of dictator, that he has a power called actores, which means that he has like authorship and authority over the idea of Bitcoin. And through him cementing his will of the 21 million coins and choosing to step away, he did something fundamentally that no other human can do in this day and age. And to me, that refusal and turning away and walking away from Bitcoin, that's what made it go from being just a revolutionary object into what I believe is fundamentally a messianic object, because he's removed any ability or capacity for his own will or influence on the system to change anything. And now it's become a fully, I guess we could say, communalized commonwealth that's about all of our own interactions with it, you know? And even that word commonwealth is derived from the Latin word res publica, which means the public thing, which we could really say Bitcoin is the most public thing. And it is literally a commonality of wealth that we share together that gives us truly equal rights under the rules that are Bitcoin.
It's oh man, so many threads there I want to pull on. Like the idea that, because I still speak to people today who are afraid of this idea that Satoshi, disappeared, and like for me, I actually, early on, it hit me because I did definitely do some research early on as I was trying to discover Bitcoin, and discovered how the eCash, Charms stuff, eGold, and all these sorts of things were taken down, and I don't know, like I've never heard anyone really describe Bitcoin as a tool of war like you have, and that really resonates with me, because I guess tying that into your article here, which we were supposed to discuss, which we've I guess discussed peripherally here, is this civil war for freedom, because this is this is where we are, and I think in one of my articles I kind of talked about how it's really interesting in the world and in life, how as one force rises, another equal and opposite force sort of emerges to counterbalance it. And what we're seeing, particularly this year, is this this extreme blowout of the state of emergency, where we're seeing the state as an entity doing things that we all thought were fiction when we were watching movies like The Matrix or V for Vendetta, which are now turning into literally like documentaries. That we were sort of warned of exactly the playbook of the For Your Safety and the curfew and all that sort of shit. We watched that stuff 10, 15, 20 years ago thinking, oh yeah, that's a really great cinematic piece, but we're living through it now. And and as that's arisen, you have this counterbalancing force of Bitcoin sort of arising on the other side, and offering an opt-out. So I guess my question here, which I'm trying to get to, is what is this civil war for freedom, and who is the civil war amongst? Can you sort of dig into that?
Yeah, so I'd say it's sort of an interesting idea. I like to call it a secret civil war too, because like it's never really declared and there aren't really defined lines, because it's a civil war against everyone at all places for all thing. Like it and to me, like this is part of what makes it messianic and apocalyptic, is that like it is literally about the control of everything, to know all things, to control all people, to control all wealth, to control all dialogue, to control everything across the board. And that's part of what the state has become, is this idea of terror and safety. And that if you don't give complete power over to us and our apparatuses, you will be afraid and you will be unsafe. And I think it's important because they want us to collapse into that and to realize that we don't have any idea of power for ourselves or agency. And it loops back around to Eric Fromm's idea of the fear of freedom, which is that like freedom is a scary thing. It's difficult to come to terms with that. Maybe we're fully empowered to create the world that we want and desire. And meanwhile, we have the state over here being like, no, like the virus, it'll kill you. It'll kill your family. It'll disease you and hurt you. You can't control your money. You're too stupid to understand how money and modern monetary theory works. You're incapable of doing it. You need to go to our schools and have us fill you with our knowledge of what's right and what's wrong so that you can go work at a big bank and be a drone, and we can pay you so that you can show to the bank that you're a good worker bee and that you deserve to get a mortgage so that you can have a home, so that you can spend the rest of your life, paying us back an exorbitant amount in order just to have a home to live. And so for me, when you start to zoom out, you realize that the state doesn't really have any interest in trying to actually give us any fullness of freedom. They want compliance across the board. They want to make sure that we're well behaved, that we stay in our lane, that we don't speak out of turn or try to do anything that challenges them. And what I find the most fascinating about this is like it's not just in America, it's not just in Australia, it's not just in China, but it's like across the board. And furthermore, I would point out that when we look at these larger globalized institutions, things like the UN, for example, not that they have any real power, the fact that we're part of this body that, this year, China is now becoming one of the representatives on the Human Rights Council, like literally on the back end of them conducting like the most precise genocide that's been carried out in all of human history. The fact that they were able to take out the entirety of Uyghur culture to, do some of the most insidious and torturous things to these people, and to have barely any resistance present itself, goes to show how extraordinarily powerful this panopticon has become and the way that it allows for power. And again, like this is one of the reasons why my website is crypto sovereignty and not Bitcoin sovereignty, is, Bitcoin is the main shilling point of how we change everything with wealth. But underneath it, it's the cryptography itself that allows for us to and conduct our transactions in such a way that truly protects us. And I have very high hopes for how people can start utilizing this on a much greater front, because it's not just about Bitcoin, but it's about using technology like Signal. It's about making sure that you are, using multi-sig and encrypting and can't be directly extracted from you. And it's really about trying to rebuild the entirety of the web on top of cryptography in such a way that the state no longer can conduct this secret civil war against us and sell our information to, their corporate oligarchic allies. And at the deepest level, I think it's really just about us making the subjective choice that we want to be free, even if that freedom is terrible, even if that freedom means that we have to make very difficult choices about our safety and well-being, and all the way to the extent of even if choice of freedom means that I destroy myself, and I think particularly in this pandemic, that's something that's really important, because, like I know the way that you're choosing to live isn't the way that I'm going to choose to live right now because of my family and the sort of risks that come up around my extended family. But with that being said, I absolutely desire for other people to be able to go out and live their lives however they choose to do. Yep. And I think we're encountering this very extreme conflict right now, where instead of people being allowed to have the liberty and freedom to make their own choices, because we've lived inside of this sort of civil war for control over everything in so long, it's very clear there's a large part of the population that wants to have the state have full purview over everything in our lives. They want the state to be able to make whatever decisions they want for us. They are terrified of the real freedom of what it means to have to make choices for yourself.
That reminds me of the cattle discussion we're having before this. Can you describe that example for the listeners. While you describe that, I'm just going to shut this door here because there's planes flying overhead. But yeah, because for me, and I've written this on many tweets and all this sort of stuff, is for me the most disappointing part of 2020. And as I said earlier, is like the state is going to state, bureaucrats are going to bureaucrat. Like so all this stuff, we kind of can expect it. You know, I think for me the most disappointing element of 2020 and of this sort of this civil war, this invisible civil war, is our fellow citizens, you know, behaving in some sadomasochistic manner where, you know, they beg for more oppression and they hope that their neighbor is also oppressed. And that for me, like, it absolutely disgusts me. And I think the analogy you gave me earlier was just so poignant. It's such a great metaphor for understanding this. So if you can sort of talk that through while I go close this door.
Yeah, I think earlier what I was saying is like, you know, like a century before, as people, you know, like we were kind of like these wild bison out living in the world and nature, taking on the risks of life for ourselves. But slowly over the last 100 years, the state has managed to sort of confine us and start to put us into this open-air cage, if you will. And furthermore, started breeding all of the other bison in such a way so that they're no longer wild bison, but they've just become, you know, generalized cattle that you know, and because they're cattle and cows and the state has watched out for them, they're like, hey, this is great. Like we get our free grass out here. There's this fence that keeps all the wolves out, so we don't have to worry about anything. We can just get super fat and lazy on all this grass. And then like they have the happy factory over there where like we can go in and like nobody ever comes out of the happy factory, but like it's a really great place because once you go into the happy factory, like you go to bison heaven. And meanwhile, there's like some of us who are still wild bison who like kind of get what's going on. We're like, yo, guys, like that's a slaughterhouse. Like you're going there just to die. And they're like, whoa, hang on. Like, why would the super nice state who's like made these great fences for us that like keep all the wolves out, like, why would they ever want to do that? You know, and like the real dialogue is like, look, it keeps the wolves out, but like it prevents you from going out and exploring the real world and getting to understand all of the reward that goes on in there, you know. And I think another component to this too is that, you know, as these cattle that have grown up with us too, and they're like, whoa, like why the fuck would you ever want to go outside of the fence? Like it's dangerous out there. And you're like, well, you know what? Like I want to take that risk for myself. Like they're gonna go, whoa, hang on, like moo, like good farmer, like he's trying to escape, like he's gonna risk all of us because he's trying to get out of the fence. You know, and it's I think part of it is because there's like a true I don't know if jealousy is the right word, but when you see other people living in this way that you can't really achieve for yourself, it puts this mistaste in your mouth, you know. And I think like that's a mistake that a lot of the far left makes, is that because they can't achieve extraordinary wealth for themselves, they want to make sure that other people can't get that either.
Yeah, and envy is a strange thing. It's always been a an emotion I've loathed or despised, because I, like, you know, I've always ascribed or aspired to be the best of myself. And I mean, we all experience some level of envy and jealousy, you know, during different periods of time. But I think that's one thing I consciously and early on, you know, really chose not to experience, because it's fucking toxic. Like envy and jealousy is, I think, you know, where in many ways it's kind of like, you know, the root of all evil. And I think, you know, the fact that human beings in many ways we're reflections of each other. You know, when our own inadequacies are reflected back to us, you know, it's quite easy to resort to, you know, envy and jealousy and, hey, Mr. Farmer, you know, he is doing something that the rest of us are not doing, and not, you know, you know, the envious almost trick themselves into believing that they're doing it, or that they're snitching for the good of everybody, when in reality it is from the lowest level of you know, the needs hierarchy possible, which is, you know, them trying them expressing their own inadequacy in some way, shape, or form, and it's a really disgusting emotion,
Well,
or it's a really disgusting behavior.
I think those sort of emotions and behaviors too have been deeply cultivated by the sort of society that we live in, and it's alarming because those are the sort of emotions that I think have allowed for the state to achieve the kind of success that it has, but
Yes.
also like it's this really dynamic feedback mechanism of, you know, you feed people fiat food, you give people a fiat education, you give people fiat values, and you reduce them into just general consumers. Like it makes for all of this dark and hideous emotions
Yes.
inside of people that you can never actually become bigger.
Mm-hmm.
You no longer meet people in society who want to celebrate you and want to make you become shining that we all have the ability for, but they want to make sure you stay within that homogenized confines of what it means to be another worker bee. And I think that that's been one of the other things that's been really extraordinary about the Bitcoin community on the whole is that like people here are really wild and different, have different ideas, and are really open to celebrating others and what they bring to this world. And I think that that's just part of what, and part of what this ontology of Bitcoin is that like it's not just about Bitcoin, but it's really about helping people find their own way and celebrating them to be the unique, different individuals that they can.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a really beautiful thing to see, because I know that my story isn't unique, and so having other people show up and celebrate my writing and tell me to do more has really let me lean deeper into it and continue my own experiments and, you know, art, for lack of a better word, in the space that keeps letting me get bigger and have more confidence and esteem. And I've talked about this with a few other guys, and part of that is just the ability to look at Bitcoin and make a subjective choice about it, to say, no, this is real. This is something that'll help me. This is something that will change my life. And through making that choice and getting rewarded through it, both economically and otherwise, there becomes this much more profound capacity as an individual to start believing in yourself, believing into others, getting to celebrate them. And the same function of envy around wealth doesn't present itself, because, you know, with I know you and I, because of what Bitcoin has done over the last month, you know, like we both have been rewarded in kind. And like, if I'm watching that from the outside on the sidelines, like I can very much see how that creates envy and how that creates this idea of that there's something unfair here. But again, looping back into what Bitcoin is, you know, it becomes, no, like you can share in this too. You just need to believe in it and know that all the FUD and bullshit that other people have told you about is that, and that they don't understand it in the way that I do or you do, and that they utilize all of their small state-based perspective to critique this in a way that's not really a critique, but is just matching the general dialogue that the state wants us to believe about.
Yeah, it requires people, you know, reconnect with themselves as a bison, not as a cattle. And that's literally like that analogy fits there as well. I think a couple of notes that I've just made here while you're talking is, you know, the state has slowly by slowly systematically removed meaning and purpose from people's lives, because
Absolutely.
meaning and purpose, you know, comes from responsibility, and the more responsibility you know, the more agency you remove from people, the less opportunity they have to find meaning and to find purpose, and to develop pride, because sort of the antidote to envy is pride. But you can't have pride when you don't have any meaning, like, and it's this sort of this empty existence where we then project our own inadequacies, which you can lie to yourself as much as you want. You can distract yourself with as many drugs as you want, but at the end of the day, like, if you don't fill yourself with meaning, you are going to be empty, and all that you've got then is distraction, ignorance, or envy, which are all paths to oblivion. And I think in many ways, Bitcoin's that step towards first and most important foundational step towards you know personal responsibility and personal agency. And I think I called it in my most recent article, like, Bitcoin is the renaissance of responsibility. And for me, like, that is such a it aligns with me in such a deep way. And I think yourself and all other Bitcoiners, and I think that's why we find it so messianic, because it is so contrary to the prevailing theme in the world today.
Absolutely.
So
Well, what
yeah.
you just said reminded me of Michel Foucault. His last real philosophical treatise was based upon the Greek idea of self-care. And we think this idea of self-care kind of in this idea of either health or maybe in like a moralistic idea. But when I say self-care, I mean the totalizing of what it means to truly care for oneself. And Bitcoin, in my opinion, it is the precipice of what it means to truly care for yourself, because it says, you know what, I'm going to put my wealth inside of a means that no matter what happens, I can always reaccess it. If I get hit by a bus tomorrow, I know that my family will be able to access my Bitcoin and utilize it in such a way that will continue to protect them. But furthermore, it takes upon the self-responsibility of the world to say, when we look at what is happening with our financial, monetary, economic, and social systems, it's been overthrown by these sociopaths who say that they have a total right to it and that they can change or inflate it or do whatever they want to without our input. And that is fundamentally an idea that ignores the self-care of ourself and the self-care of what our common wealth is that we share. And furthermore, I'd also connect this to another ancient Greek idea of parousia, which is like this idea of frank truth, frank speak, and that
Mhm.
Bitcoin is the epitome of that fairness of saying, look, here we have an object of money that has a fixed supply that cannot be inflated. Through this one action alone, Bitcoin has become the most valuable object in all of human history. And it's doing it only through a function of truth. Like,
Mhm.
that is
Mhm.
such an extraordinary and radical idea. Just through the truth-telling means that is Bitcoin, and the fact that each transaction that has happened had to have been consensual insofar that each individual revealed their private key. And even with that limited rule set, we know that, like 22% of Bitcoin has been hacked at some point in time or another, because people have their own shitty security management.
Mhm.
Even with that, Bitcoin is still the most valuable object in human existence. And it's just because of this one ability for it not to have lied about how many units of accounting there are. And to me, like, we need to really look at that more deeply and think, why can it do this? Like, what does that mean about our current monetary systems and standards? And I hope as more and more people look at this, they'll realize that, okay, I've seen what Bitcoin's done over the past 10 years. I see how it's grown. I've seen the dialogue from all of these people. I also see all the critiques from the state, from fucking morons like Peter Schiff and other idiots who want us to only own
Mhm.
gold and to check Bitcoin. And I really hope that they'll take a moment to say, you know what? Maybe it's time that I choose Bitcoin because of what its actual promise is and how different it is from the state. And I think that choice, not only, is it going to actually protect your wealth in a new and radically different way, but there starts to become a real idea of agency, of people
Mhm. Mhm.
making a choice of self-sovereignty and taking on the personal responsibility of what it means to have a self-care that's so extreme that it's no longer relegating that self-care to the state in an extremely erroneous way that's very dangerous. And that is frankly the opposite of self-care, but is oh, I don't even have a good word for it, but it's the very disgusting and lowly idea that we have personal agency to love and protect ourselves, but we need to get that from the state.
Yeah, it's everything you're saying now, and even like the analogy you gave earlier with the cattle and bison, it reminds me of two things. One is if you remember the Pixar movie Wall-E, where you've got that little
The
the
cute little
little
garbage
robot
robot.
dude. Yeah. And the humans at the end of it, right? Who were basically in the spaceship, and they were distracted with food and their screens, completely oblivious to everything else, and the computer that was running the ship or whatever, like, wanted to eliminate any knowledge of the fact that there may have been life back in the original world, because so it made people comfortable enough, made them feel safe enough, made them basically blind and oblivious to actual reality, uh with this promise of like safety and shelter. And I think it's such an alluring siren call for for anybody that wants to forsake their own individual greatness, because the path to your own individual sovereignty is not, it's not easy. But anything that is easy lacks meaning. And so it's such a interesting, like, divergence in thought. And I can understand in many ways why it may be alluring, but it definitely is like the path to emptiness. And you see, whether it was the Stoics, whether it was the the Taoists, whether it was the Buddhists, there's been all sorts of teachings and philosophies throughout history that have sort of warned us of this stuff. And we seem to have collectively turned a blind eye towards it. And the state has become the most powerful, I guess, provider of initially protection, which has morphed into imprisonment. That's actually something that I've said on other podcasts before. Is Tony Robbins? It's a phrase from Tony Robbins, and I always butcher it because I can't remember exactly what it was. But he says, the walls that protect you over time become the walls that imprison you. And we are definitely there. We are definitely in a prison, and so many of us think that fence is still protecting us, when it's no longer protecting us. It's ensuring that we are going to bison heaven, which is disappointing, to say the least.
Yeah, and I'd even go so far as to point out, like, keep in mind that the means through which the Holocaust was conducted, the Jews were taken into protective custody, and they were put into the ghettos for their safety. And
Yeah,
let's
wow, I
also
didn't know
keep in,
that. Okay.
like, through the entirety of that time, you had the Jewish councils internally saying, we just need to comply. If we just keep following what they say, it'll be okay. And it's really alarming because we have all of these boundaries and these constructs. We have allowed for the state a very, very radical power that here in the United States, it's gotten pretty dangerous. Of that, the police have became these both judge, jury, and executioners who can unilaterally shoot whoever they want, and it's pretty clear that justice will never actually get delivered post hoc. And so, I it's one of those things of that, like, I'm not really even sure what to do anymore to try to convince people of something different. And like, this is sort of one of the more funny things about the ontology of Bitcoin, is that, like, all I can really do is shrug and be like, have fun staying poor. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. And it's not because, like, I actually want you to stay poor, but, like, realize that, like, like all we did was buy Bitcoin and believe in it, and like that has fundamentally increased our wealth exponentially in a way that no other investment opportunity could ever offer. And yet, even with the knowledge of that going on, what I find so funny about it is they look at Bitcoin, they go, well, it has to be a scam. And instead of them inverting their perspective to be like, well, if Bitcoin does this, like, why isn't everything else a scam? Like, what's Bitcoin doing that's so unique and powerful that sets it apart? And I think, I forget who it was on Twitter recently, but they said something to the effect, you know, it was one of these major investors who was like, markets are a scam. And I think that that's really important because like we're fundamentally at a place in human history where these disgusting features of really human evil have presented themselves so readily and frequently that there's just a total banality to this idea that like our stock markets and the way that the government functions, like it's all corrupt, it's all a huge grift, it's all a giant scam. And that a lot of these most powerful guys at the top, like they believe that, and it's like not a big deal or an ethical conundrum for them. It's just what we deal with. And then when they encounter an actual object of total truth, the only way they can even make it function in their mind is it has to be a scam. It has to be some kind, you know. And then the most ironic part of that is that that's what then has them make a pivot into altcoinery, as they go, well, this like Bitcoin's past, but like, ooh, like Ripple's going to be the great thing that changes everything. Fucking clowns.
Yeah. Question in here is why, you know, because I view the emergence of the state in many ways was, you know, I don't know if necessity is too strong, but you know, it's sort of, you know, if you look at the sovereign individual thesis, or you just sort of look at the decay of the church at the time, and sort of the rise of the merchant, and you know, the rise of science, and sort of like it was this kind of Goldilocks period for an apparatus like the state to kind of emerge, and it didn't emerge obviously overnight. It kind of evolved, but you know, the original promise of the state, or of the nation state, was this idea that, you know, private property rights, you know, could be protected, such that, you know, the emergence of the sovereign individuals could come to be in some way, shape, or form. So you know, there was originally like a promise uh, that came with the emergence of the state. Um, you know, but today it's sort of decayed to the point where, you know, it's no longer a provider of protection, but it is the thing we seek to be protected from. You know, it's the oppressor today. So what's your sort of position on that? Do you think the state was an aberration from the beginning? Do you think it emerged, you know, for potentially positive reasons in the beginning and sort of has decayed? Like, what's your standpoint there?
Yeah, I mean, well, first of all, like we kind of need to have a deeper understanding of the historic context and what the state arose out of, you know. And in 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia was really the first creation of the contemporary state as we understand it, where the monarch was no longer married to the church directly as a function of being able to create, you know, the Commonwealth as we understand it. And that was on the back end of the 30 War, you know. So like there was a lot of very deep and violent conflict that created the state out of this entity. And I think early on, because there were still a lot of these notions of honor and duty and righteousness, and you know, there was still a lot of these influential morals that came through the idea of the state that was able to fuse up with the Enlightenment that was going on. I think that the state itself, body, functioned relatively well for maybe, you know, 200 years. And further, it created the general framework that allowed for the American Revolution to assert itself and to create this totally new governing structure. With that being said, as soon as we, you know, had the United States and that it started to expand its territorial power, it became very clear that it could get compromised through the legislature and through things passing. And in my opinion, through the concourse of history, like, it worked pretty well, for the first, 150 years. And then I'd say what happened was, when we had, there was a series of banking crises that happened in the 1890s and in the early 1900s. The United States had to ask for JP Morgan and friends to bail out the United States. This is how the Federal Reserve got created. It's also right around when World War I started. And this is where we started to see the state enter into this radical new dialogue of that it wasn't really there just to protect private rights, but it was to make international war against others who, because of trade relations or otherwise, that they could readily do that. And then by the end of World War II, we had gone to this extreme place where the state was no longer this apparatus to just assure private property, but it had assumed the totality of all life everywhere, and that it had a right over all of it everywhere. And in my opinion, it really caused for this sort of neo-communist idea to start presenting itself of that, like the US Constitution was no longer about the limitation of government power, but was about the expansion of government power and all of the things it could capture. And then today, really after 9 was the next kind of extraordinary move that we saw was that now it could just idea of the state of emergency to unilaterally declare whoever it wants to be an enemy. And through that ability, they were able to kind of continue to expand their power into all of these radical ways, which now has us arrive at this place where, the state is the preemptive capacity to hurt anybody under this purview of the idea of the state of emergency, and that it can declare whatever it wants to be a state of emergency. And it's deeply ironic that, very similar to the foundation of the Treaty of Westphalia and the answer to these horrific civil wars that were going on throughout all of Europe, very similar to kind of the low-level civil wars that we're experiencing here, Bitcoin as this new public object, the most public object, turns out to be res publica. Like, it's truly the commonwealth that we can all make a choice to utilize, and we can say confidently that the system of Bitcoin and its rule set is going to give us equal rights to you and me insofar as the actual system itself functions. And one of the most interesting aspects of that is through cryptography, it allows for this actual homogenization that fully restores property rights because it's no longer tethered to physical identities.
Yeah. So one thing you mentioned there is this the transformation of the state as a, or the transformation of the interpretation of the Constitution as something that should limit state power to being interpreted as the expansion of state power. That's such an interesting point, because one of my questions was going to be, why does the state want all this control? Like, is it that the state is some sort of conniving evil thing? But maybe it's that this interpretation of limitation has gone out the window and expansion has replaced it. And when you think about it, the existence is holistic. So if something is expanding, something else needs to be receding. And in many ways, as the state expands, the individual recedes. So what's your thoughts there, like more broadly speaking? Because there is a lot of people, like, there's a lot of tinfoil hats, and there's a lot of people, who genuinely believe there's fucking lizards running the show, and and I sort of don't subscribe to a lot of that stuff, because I think, much of the expansionary nature, or the oppressive nature of the state is not, some desire to do evil, although that does exist. I'm sure there's machinations and, Machiavellian plans in the background, to fuck with people. But I think a lot of it is just so, fundamentally skewed because the incentives are so broken and because the infrastructure upon which it stands is so misinterpreted that it inevitably leads towards stupidity, oppression, collapse, emergency, etc. So what's your thoughts? Where do you sit on that spectrum, and why do you think it is that the state wants to expand and wants to have control? Is it a conscious choice, or is it just an unconscious direction that it's sort of falling into?
A combination of two. Like I think part of what happened between World War One and World War Two, I really view them as like a single conflict with this interim that's like a very important story about how the Second World War came about. Was I think that with the expansion of state power and the sort of realpolitik it is, that the states started to butt heads against each other, and it became clear that the only resolution to this was through the of total war. But furthermore, once the idea of total war had been broached in such a way, individuals' only way to really participate and get safety within that perspective was to fully give themselves over to the state. And I think then going into the idea of, if you're familiar with Hannah Arendt's Eichmann in Jerusalem, where she has the quote in there about the banality of evil. And what she tries to point out in there is like, look, like the Eichmanns of the world, Eichmann was responsible for keeping the trains running on time that was delivering people to Auschwitz. And he very kind of pedantically maintained like, look, I'm a good man. I believe in these Kantian philosophical principles of that I was just obeying orders. I was just doing what I was told. And what she points out in it, she goes, look, like Eichmann was evil, but it's not because he was like this maniacal, horrific human being that had all these evil ideas that he wanted to play out. It was more of that, like, he was a stupid and weak-willed man who, when he encountered these things that we knew were fundamentally evil, he didn't have the spine or the will to resist it. And so the true question is when men like that get captured inside of evil, we should expect for them to do exactly what they're doing. We shouldn't have any expectation for that to be different. The real question is, what do we do when we encounter it? And I think that that's become a more and more alarming prospect, is that people don't want to actively speak towards evil when they see it and make a firm and fundamental choice about how to deal with it as individuals. They always want to go back to the state to try to have the state do something about it. And I think entered into a deeply alarming place where it's really made the notion of justice on a whole incapable, because now people turn to the state as the answer for all problems across the board, good, bad, evil, any sort of thing that can help them. And I think since the end of World War II and kind of this infinite expansion of power, it's became this really deeply alarming prospect of that people don't believe that they can limit the state's power in any way. In addition to, they feel like the only way that they can ever achieve safety and security is through the state, which is a dialogue that they've cultivated very thoroughly. And it's really sad, because it's very apparent that the state is always going to be invested in itself first and foremost, and that like we'll always be their first victim. And a lot of kind of my writing has dealt with this idea of that, like the possibility for us to become the other, the enemy, like the intolerable, is really important, because any of us can get that for any reason. And in this article I pointed out, like, Bitcoiners should be prepared for that, like, with what the price is doing, where it's going, like, this thing's going to be an utter fucking wrecking ball to the financial system. And we're going to find ourselves in that position of where we're going to be the enemy. We're going to be attacked for the way that we believe in Bitcoin and want people to leave the system. And we need to be very prepared for when that time comes, like, I'll readily admit that like a lot of this dialogue scares the shit out of me, because like I realistically believe that one day I will be out for a walk and I will get black bagged and taken in a van somewhere, and like that's kind of it. And I think we just need to be prepared for when such things happen, because the state sincerely believes that, you know, these dudes who are doing it in a van, like they'll sit here being like, I'm the good guy, like I'm abducting this terrorist who's doing horrific things out on the internet, spreading radical ideology that's having people believe the financial system needs to collapse, and so he's an evil man that we need to put the full purview of the law on top of. And it's scary because they believe that, you know, and there's not much I can really do to try to convince them of otherwise.
Yeah, dude, that is I think, again, who was I think I was talking to Brandon Quittem, where there was a guy on Twitter who was, I don't know, I think he was like trying to blast me or Breedlove or Gigi or one of us about how, you know, we're all just a bunch of greedy pieces of shit who, you know, who are talking our own book so that because we got into Bitcoin early, you know, we can make a bunch of money and everyone else stays poor, you know, and it was just, and we weren't being assholes in the beginning. You know, we were trying to explain, like, look, you know, a lot of the people who are in Bitcoin today are not here just to get rich. You know, we're here to help transform the world in many ways. And this guy, I think, on his bio or his profile, it was like, you know, uh, business owner, yoga teacher, you know, volunteer or something, right? And you could tell
Wokey
straight away, like, he
wokeness.
had a very, basically, he was sort of had this social justice warrior nature about him, but he was vehemently angry and opposed to the notion that Bitcoiners like us had gotten in a lot earlier than he did. And, you know, for him now it was something that's, you know, expensive and out of reach. And we're still only at $25,000, mind you. It's like, imagine, you know, what people's behavior is going to be when, you know, Bitcoin is worth a million of these shit coins that we call dollars, and it's completely out of reach to 99% of the population. Like, you know, that to me is genuinely frightening. And I think, having lived through the cacophony and clusterfuck that 2020 has been, you know, I don't have a lot of faith in, you know, humanity's ability to admire the courage that it took for Bitcoiners to stand by what we believed, you know, through the dips, through the ups, through the downs, through the constant, you know, being called idiot, crazy, dumb, you know, fantastical, and all this sort of shit that we got to put up with. They're gonna discount all of that and just call us lucky, or in some ways, you know, they're going to call us evil because we have managed to, quote unquote, enrich ourselves, and they're going to think that it's at the expense of them, which it's not. So it's a, yeah, like I think what Brandon and I mentioned to each other, it's like, you know, evil is not necessarily, you know, it stems from like real deep-seated ignorance, and like we were sort of discussing earlier, is just this envy that comes as a result of the emptiness of oneself, and that's a very hard problem to solve, and to reconcile. And I think, you know, whilst Bitcoin does fix this, you know, and I believe it fixes a lot, you know, that I think that this decade ahead of us is going to be a really, really tough one. And I mean, you know, in whilst Bitcoin is that piece of hope, you know, we as Bitcoiners are far more at risk on an individual level than Bitcoin itself is. And, you know, we're going to have to really
Yeah, you
rethink
know,
how we behave.
I think, you know, people like Ross Ulbricht is just like the very, very first
Mm,
victims of the state
mm-hmm,
and sort of
mm-hmm.
what's happened. And I expect it to happen with more of us too. You know, like whether they're going to make up a bunch of bullshit about us front running markets and trying to enrich ourselves and making it all about money. And I think it's funny because, like, something that you've said earlier that I kind of echo is it's like, I think people come for the profits, but they stay for the prophecy. And it's a very powerful idea, because, like, yeah, sure, I've gotten wealthy from believing in this, and that it's afforded me a kind of wealth that I didn't believe I would have before. But what inspires me much more is that, like, look, as I've said before, like, this is the most public thing. Like, anybody on the planet can go ahead and acquire themselves Bitcoin by
Yeah.
selling their goods or whatever, and that they're welcome to join us at any point in time to change their unit of accounting. And furthermore, like, Bitcoin's at $25,000 today, 10 years after, its real birth into the world, not because of the radical scam that is Bitcoin, but it's because of the scam that everything else is.
Yeah.
This guy that was, like, attacking you guys, calling you greedy and stuff, like, he clearly doesn't have an actual fundamental understanding of what's going on. In addition to, I would be really curious to see what his perspective would be about politicians and the way that they've enriched themselves utilizing the state and the free money printing and all of the other apparatuses that have allowed for them to enrich themselves in deep ways. And, I agree with you. I think that this next decade is going to be pretty scary. And I really hope that we accelerate our desire to create something like Citadel, or at least a jurisdiction that we all know is pretty friendly to us, because I think that that's going to become of more and more necessity. And I have my bias here as an American, but, I very much believe that this needs to be, I don't want to necessarily say somewhere in America, but at least in North America, where the idea of being able to be freely armed is something, because and I think I've said this before, like, I think every Bitcoiner needs to be armed. They need to know how to utilize weapons, and they need to be prepared for when and if that time comes that they're attacked by the state or Apple. And I do think it eventually goes into blown conflict where they're going to say, hey, anybody who has Bitcoin, we have a right to extract that from them physically. And it'll be scary because, like, we'll need to utilize clever M of N signature means to essentially trigger dead man switches that can let our wealth go and try to liberate us. My hope is that we'll just find a communal jurisdiction where if they want to come and attack us, right on, like, it's not going to be good for you, but if you want to try, feel free.
Yeah. I mean, there's going to be no, like, I ascribe to the lead bullet strategy for all of this. So, I would pluralize jurisdictions. I would pluralize strategies, because I mean, if Bitcoin's shown us anything, it's that it won because it is so distributed. And in much the same way, like, if we're like, I mean, it's guerrilla warfare. Like, literally, this is what we have to do. Like, we exist in this real life civil war where it's the central large scale, call it US Army against the Vietnamese guerrillas, which is us, being able to be more nimble, more distributed, and it's hard to hit small objects. And then we need to sort of transform the, I feel like it's going to be initially about, like, obfuscation and sort of the, the guerrilla nature of being a hard target to hit, followed then by, as our, commonwealth really increases in value, and as more skin comes into the Bitcoin game, we need to transform that into basically statecraft, in the sense that, we won't be building a reincarnation of the existing state, but we'll be transforming, into this modern citadel type state of, free states. And how that then interacts with the old guard is going to be quite important. So it's funny, we're all going to need to brush up on traditional statesmanship and strategy, and how to deal with people and all this sort of stuff, like how to deal, in the realm of politic in the Aristotelian sense. And I think, yeah, that transformation over 2020 is going to be profound, and I think it's going to be those of us who are not just here to fucking trade or to make a buck or to, be in the next pump. Like those of us who are really thinking deeply are going to be the leaders that help, develop the future of, the free states that I think are going to be the Noah's Arks as the house of cards that exists today begins to fall apart.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring all this up. I have another article that I haven't really discussed much, but it's called Theory of the Crypto Partisan, which adapts one of Carl Schmitt's final pieces about the theory of the partisan. And it's sort of this, in this article, I make the point that like crypto anarchists and Bitcoiners, like we're part of this totally new topology of war that like includes the internet in itself. But furthermore, like we're the guerrilla warriors, like of the internet as like our Telluride home, like it's the place that we live and reside within. And more people, as they're coming to realize what Bitcoin and the internet offers, like they're essentially switching their loyalty from the nation state to this new, larger, globalized idea of how the internet can allow for us to create new sovereignty together. And furthermore, like as this war plays out more and more, like we're going to find our tactics inside of the internet are going to play out in a much larger way. And I actually think this entire idea of statecraft eventually actually marries up with the idea of the colonization of space and essentially space war, because I think like that's going to be kind of the final place that once, say 30, 50, 80 years out, when we do have these extremely powerful city states that are using, various nuclear reactors to like mine Bitcoin and achieve self-sovereignty through energy and other things, that we'll eventually get ourselves into space, and that like, the way that we will mitigate the state's threat of a nuclear strike is essentially to have space superiority over them, to where, if they want to try to nuclear bomb us, we'll just throw a fucking tungsten bar at them from outer space, and that'll be the end of that. And hopefully none of that shit will ever go down, because we'll have that threat lying over
deterrence.
them.
Yeah, the deterrent element. Yeah.
Yeah, and and hopefully what this looks like is, and to your point too, we should have many strategies and tactics, and I hope that eventually there will become this league of city states where essentially, whatever city it is will say, look, we accept Bitcoin as our one object of exchange. We're going to utilize, we'll do taxes or fees or whatever in Bitcoin. We're going to have a libertarian council government that's going to help us. And that essentially they'll utilize the same strategies to resist the state, from a local level to a larger and larger level. And I've been speaking more and more about, I would really love to see Bitcoin politicize itself in the United States through us really trying to empower the various state legislatures, like the state of California or Wyoming or Washington or whatever, and to really try to get them to pass their own legislation that can start resisting and fighting back against the federal government.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm the most fascinated with is the idea of, there's something in the United States Constitution called Article 5. And in Article 5, there's a stipulation that you can actually amend the United States Constitution through state legislatures directly. And so if you can get 35 of the various state legislations to pass an amendment to the United States Constitution, like it unilaterally is supposed to be amended to the US Constitution, completely circumnavigating the president, US Congress, and the US Senate. It just gets ratified immediately. And to me, trying to encourage states to say, look, we can utilize this as a means to directly fight the federal government there. And I like to refer to the federal government like it has a generalized imperialism over the rest of the United States. Like I think today, if we could just purge the federal government from the United States and allow for us to be a loose confederacy, that would be a very, very powerful way to counterpower. But it's also pretty dramatic. Like I think even if we were to pass legislation in 35 state legislatures to recognize Bitcoin as a means of payment and to also destroy the Federal Reserve, there's no fucking way that they would let that happen.
Yeah.
You know, and so to me, like, the most powerful thing we can do is convert individuals to make their own subjective choice to keep their wealth inside of Bitcoin. At the end of the day, we don't have to play the political game with that. You know, at that, when that happens, it's hyperinflation happen. Bitcoin becomes worth $1 million, 2 million, 8 million, 10 million, 20 million, 100 million, a billion, a trillion, you know, and people are like, that's fucking impossible. Like, have you ever held a Zimbabwe note for 100 billion? Or, you know, like, I have one somewhere in here that the people at River were kind
I've got
enough.
some bolivars, but yeah, it's
yeah, you know, but the point is that you know, like, it's very realistic for it to happen. And I get Americans don't like to think that it could happen to us just because it hasn't happened yet. But let's be very clear, like, this has happened to many, many people over the concourse of history over the last 200 years, many, many times. And people need to be prepared that, like, Bitcoin isn't becoming worth these astronomical values just because of the value proposition it has. That's one of the reasons. But people really don't connect this idea that because states have given, because, you know, the federal government here in the United States and elsewhere have given themselves the right to create unlimited money, like, Bitcoin doesn't have any kind of a value cap that can be put on it. And furthermore, we should have a realistic expectation that it should go to 10, 20, 30, 80, $100 million, not just because Bitcoin's that valuable, but because all of this other money in the system is going to flood into it.
Yeah.
Particularly because now the smartest, I was just going to say that the other thing that's really funny is that the, you know, quote, the smart money is now starting to understand Bitcoin. And more like, they're understanding, you know, what makes them smart isn't that they're actually that brilliant intelligent. It's just they're starting to see the herd starting to come this way. And they happen to have a whole lot of cattle in that herd that they don't want to miss out on. And the 100%. State's fucked up by printing infinite amounts of money and saying we have a right to print infinite amounts of money. Well, I don't know what to tell you. If you sincerely expect for something to happen other than hyperinflation, I mean, if we're really fucking lucky, it's going to be kind of a limited set of inflation. But, you know, it's fucked up. You know, like, we're giving $30 million to gender studies in Pakistan. I mean, come on, when we're doing this kind of idiotic shit, like, what's supposed to happen?
Yeah, exactly. What do you think was going to happen if you jumped off your balcony and, you know, thought you could fly? It's embarrassing. And again, like, you know, when I was talking to Stoney and American Hodl on a podcast, I was kind of saying, you know, who would have thought that we would join a revolution and in the process, you know, get rich? And one of my points around that was this idea that, you know, the inevitability of Bitcoin is not just, and again, this completely echoes what you just said. It's not just in Bitcoin's, you know, nature as an objective truth, you know, and it's in its positive attributes. It's in the fact that it's aligned with gravity almost. Like, it is gravity. So it's, you know, economic Darwinism itself, like the fact that everything else is so contra to the flow of nature, the flow of logic, the flow of, you know, subjective and objective reality. Like, everything else is an aberration to that. Bitcoin just needs to exist as it is. And the rest of it, in contrast, will propel Bitcoin forward because of how fucked up it all is. And, you know, that really just echoes your sentiment there, is like, Bitcoin is so great, not just because it's great, but because everything else is so fucked up. And it's just a matter of time.
That's almost like the funniest part about it. And like, that's like at the very bottom of all of this, like, I think it's this, like, my frank truth is, like, I think God is like playing this like huge practical joke. And like, you know, I'm like, this is all for his entertainment. He's like, check it out. Like, now I'm going to like have this dude deploy like this new money that like all it does is tell truth, and because like this world is so full of like a bunch of fucking liars and scammers and shit now, that like just through its radical truth it's going to like fundamentally change the entirety of the planet. And you know, and one of the other ones is like the fact doing all of this peacefully, that like it's all done through nonviolence and through cryptography and all these other things, like that just kicks it all the more to boot, you know, that like the state shows up with all their fucking guns and violence and shit, and like even with all of that, like it can't do anything about it, is really funny, you know, like and it's really profound and beautiful too, you know, and that like I'm very like, particularly the dialogues that have been happening over the last year or so, more and more I'm realizing like just how fucking lucky we are to like be at the very beginning of this, because you know, probably in 20, 30 years when all of our kids are out in the world, you know, like their Bitcoin like is the thing they were raised with, the belief that they were in, like they're never going to put up with any of this dog shit of fiatism, or needing to go participate in these fucked up educational systems that try to just keep them low and oppressed and in their cages. And it's really beautiful because like we've built this extremely powerful base, and we've started to build up all the philosophical beliefs and value systems that really show how much this can change everything. And as much as I think that this next decade could be really, really scary and violent and horrific, I also have a really profound and deep hope that like maybe it'll all be relatively smooth and powerful, because at the end of the day, like this is really just about converting people's belief systems of knowing and understanding what it is. And I think I really want to extend and offer the opportunity that maybe a lot of these people that we've pejoratively labeled as being evil or thoughtless or clueless, that maybe they'll have their own, you know, come to Satoshi moment of where they'll realize like, oh my God, like this actually is the solution to all this fucked up nonsense that's going on. And all we have to do is just make a choice to convert our wealth into Bitcoin and to utilize that as our own subjective means of payment, you know. And maybe there will be this beautiful moment where, you know, some president of the United States in 5 years will be able to say, and with, you know, with this great and powerful move, we end the Federal Reserve and we make the choice to use a new hard money that creates liberty and justice for all, and you know, some bullshit like that. And I want to remain open to it. I want to remain open to it because it's a real radical possibility, in the same way that everything that Bitcoin's already given us is such a radical possibility.
Yeah, do you know what? You do make an interesting point there, and I think maybe that radical possibility comes as a result of, you know, the skin that's in this game already at multiple levels. You know, so sometimes Bitcoin, being in the Bitcoin space, to me feels like a real life version of Fight Club. You know, you sort of meet people that are in government and in banking and in this and in that, and you know, they're all sort of closet Bitcoiners already. And it's like, you know, could we infiltrate this enough to sort of, you know, bring it down without the you know, without the catastrophic side effects that prior revolutions have had. And I don't know, maybe there is a chance for that. I guess this
Well,
year,
and
in some ways,
I'd point out that that's like the opposite side of this secret civil war, is that like there's already all these people deployed all over the place. Like there's people in government, there's people in banking, there's people in the Senate, there's people in the House of Representatives, there's people in local government. So like maybe it'll turn out, when it's time to really play ball, will turn out like all of these actors and characters will pop up that will be able to allow for this transition to happen in a way that's not going to be violent or oppressive or hurtful, in addition to the very real fact that maybe it's all of this plays out too. Like you and I both know there isn't any way to destroy this, and maybe as they like try to attempt that and realize the impossibility of it, to just try to save face and not embarrass the shit out of themselves, and to, you know, and like because that's like another very real aspect of the realpolitik of power, is like you have to recognize what this thing is doing, and through your own recognition of it and being able to say, yo, we can't defeat this, like if we can't beat them, join them, perhaps that'll allow for a different transition of power that won't be as maniacal as we think it is.
I genuinely have a hope for that, and I mean, talking this through with you, I think like you said, the can't beat 'em, join 'em, the game theoretical shift on that is a very real possibility. It's just that I think being in the throes of 2020 still, and just seeing how ridiculously stupid society can become, like it doesn't give me as much hope. I must admit that, a year or two ago, my belief was more towards, us seeing a more peaceful transition. But the more I don't know, I've recently been. Have you read any of James Clavell's books, like
Oh
Shogun
yeah, yeah, I've read
or
all of
Taipan
them.
and stuff?
I've read Shogun,
Yeah,
Taipan,
yeah.
Gaijin, all of them.
I'm on to the third one now, onto Gaijin, and like, I mean, it's absolutely incredible. I wish I'd found this stuff earlier, but it's just, it, it's almost as much as, I'm not, Christian or religious or anything like that, and I don't subscribe to the idea that, this is sort of the one truth. I think particularly reading things like that, and learning about how Japan emerged and what China was like and all that sort of stuff. I think that's a humbling experience, because they sort of emerged and built their own societies outside of any notion of Christianity. But I think Christianity managed to really spread, and you sort of you see how it spread in these stories, and particularly in Shogun. Like, you had the Jesuits were the linguists, and it was that ability to transmit or to translate language that gave the church so much power. Like, the what was his name, Blackthorne, when he was given the dictionary, right? Like, that was
Mm-hmm.
the ultimate gift. Like, and it's like language, the ability to converse. And Bitcoin is almost that transnational language, in much the same way that the church was able to really spread Christianity, and spread off the back of trade, and the rise of trade, and this sort of linguistic advantage that it had at the time. And but at the same time, it was, I look at how messy that history was. We are the Jesuits of 500 years ago now. Like, we're spreading this gospel, but many of them, call it died, perished, and went through hell. But they had the fervency of belief that we have today, about Bitcoin. So we are in many ways those missionaries going out there, and spreading that. And I don't know, like, my I don't think life is ever clean enough to be one or the other. So I don't know if it's going to be. I doubt that it's going to be a completely peaceful transition. I doubt that it's going to be a completely violent one. It's just going to be really interesting to see how the transition happens, and where on the spectrum of violence and peaceful, peace, it it emerges. And I think the more we are able to get skin in the game from like that Fight Club scenario that we sort of mentioned before, of people in different areas, the more it can be, a peaceful, call it beautiful transition, which I think that's really where the game is. This isn't an if, or a when even. It's a how. that's that's
Well, and
the
like,
question.
same thing with, like, it took 400 years for Christians to go from being a radical Jewish sect to actually becoming the religion of the state. And I think,
Mm.
like, I have a good friend, I've talked about this, like, we'll be very lucky if we kind of get to live through and witness that transition. But I think what you said about like it being this language, like that's true. Like, Bitcoin is this language of truth and wealth that is baked in through cryptography. And I've talked about this a little
Mm-hmm.
bit before. Like, I fundamentally believe that like Bitcoin is a super language project to create a universal language that can only speak through truths. Because like
Mm-hmm.
literally every single transaction that we on the block is this truth of revealing a private key. And it creates a word that's totally unpronounceable, but is like this unique word that is the hash to like the entirety of the Bitcoin system that like refers to that singular true event. And through the education, very much in the same way that the Jesus educated about their God and his word and the world and the truth of that, like we have the same power to convert people, if you will, to utilizing Bitcoin as their choice of wealth, not because, you know, number go up and it's great and everybody's rich, but because of the very real truth that's instilled inside of Bitcoin and the radicalness that that can never change through all of human history. And I think as our dialogue becomes more powerful and poignant and specific to this context, I think conversion is going to become, I don't want to necessarily say easier, but there's going to become a more logical pathway for most people, you know. And
Mm-hmm.
and the deepest irony is that like even though this all is rather I don't know if I want to use the word spiritual, but you know, moralistic and ethical, it is sort of hilarious that like after all this conversation we can be like, and number goes up and you can get richer you doing this than anything else. And like, and I get that that's like this kind of there's some like cheesiness and grossness about it, but like that's the truth, you know. Like I can't tell you how many people I've been telling about this over the, you know, the last 8 years who repeatedly come back to me and being like, man, like I wish I would have listened. And I'm like,
Mm.
don't fucking listen to me. Like, go read the material. Like,
Yeah,
ask
yeah,
all of your poignant questions. Like, really critically think about this. And for like each specific question and critique that you have, do research around it, because you will probably find somebody has wrote about this and been able to absolutely obliterate that critique from top to bottom, which can, you know, essentially that's the journey down the rabbit hole. Is each level down you obliterate the next critique and the next one and the next
yeah,
one until
yeah.
eventually you sort of get at the bottom, you know, where like the insane crazy party is, where we're like, hey, you're like one of us now, and you like get how wonderful this is.
Enlightenment through Bitcoin. It's like literally, you know, it's modern day enlightenment.
It is, and
Man.
it's super comical that like it's done through, you know, and like to me that's one of the things that I think that there's this jester god that's in part of it, because it's like, hey, like, do you want deep enlightenment where you reflect about your value systems and get to like become a bigger and better and more powerful person who like lives with meaning and passion in life? Well, like, here's this technology that'll like make you super rich too. Like, check it out. And people are like,
And
really?
yeah,
Like, come fucking on. Like,
and
is that
and as a
true?
side note, here's some fucking Twitter and some podcasting to go along with
Yeah.
that, so you can beat each other over the head. And like, it's just, you're so right. It is such a, yes.
It's pretty
Uh,
slapstick, you know, like and I love it and it's great. And like the fact that like we get to do all of this and that it's developed to where it is today, like I just, you know, I feel so appreciative that I'm part of this system that despite the fact of what the state's doing and all of its radicalness, that like I have this firm confidence in Bitcoin and what it can deliver.
mm, mm,
You know, and furthermore, with the state of emergency and the idea that the state can capture me and do whatever it wants to me, it's really profound to have this sense of safety and security that I know even if the state does come after me, that my wife and family can recover my Bitcoin, that if they had to flee the United States and go somewhere, that they could recover that. Yeah, and it gives me a sense of security that I've never really had before. And I think that that's really important, because if we want to engage in this more radical dialogue, we can only do that through having this sort of safety.
yeah, I think I echo that in a different capacity, which was sort of, I said it's something I like before I was before I would ever relinquish my Bitcoin, I would like burn my private keys or destroy them, and before I gave them to the state, because that would then be my contribution, my personal contribution back to the hodlers, because it would just make it all that much scarcer. It's like, and I think that same sort of security, like that's a deep, 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 deep level of sovereignty that I don't think anything like I think has been largely missing as the state has encroached upon all of our individual agency and responsibility. Like and to sort of pick up shogun again is like the ancient Japanese tradition of seppuku, and this idea of honor, and you taking your own life because like so that someone else doesn't have the honor or the right to do that. And in many ways, like sort of Bitcoin is a new Bushido. Like it's it reintroduces that um that idea, and it's profound in so many ways.
I love that idea, Bitcoin Seppuku, that, the state comes for us and like we would rather tear out our own innards and
Uh-huh,
sacrifice
uh-huh.
our wealth than to like ever give it to the state. Like that also echoes the signing of the Declaration of Independence in the United States, our wealth, our lives, our honor.
Hmm,
And
hmm.
yeah, it is like a new Bushido too, because there's this code that we're all part of participating in. And to me also, like that fundamentally like is the commonwealth. Like we would rather choose to put in commonality all of our wealth in this system and sacrifice it against the state than to allow for them to have it. And I think that as we gain more confidence and esteem in that, like we're just going to become more powerful. And like the fact that now Bitcoin is the largest financial institution, object, whatever you want to call it, on the planet, like it's only going to become more resounding and powerful. And the other one is like I think about like when communism spread in Soviet Russia in 1917, like even Lenin was flabbergasted at how quick and fast it happened. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that by the nature of the sort of social beast that we are and the herd mentality we have, like I actually wouldn't be surprised if we were to revisit this conversation in 2 years and to find that, like Bitcoin is at $2 million and like states have integrated it. And there are conflicts amongst states about them trying to encourage Bitcoiners to go there. I'm like,
Yeah, yeah,
I sincerely won't be surprised if whatever state it is, like puts out a policy saying like, are you a Bitcoiner? Like, does your state have oppressive policy? Like, come to our country, we will give you new citizenship. You'll only have to pay a third of a percentage point on your Bitcoin, and moving forward, and like that's sort of where we're at now, is that the global brinkmanship for acquiring Bitcoin is starting to set its own agenda. And yeah, like I feel pretty hopeful despite how dark everything is.
yeah. I mean, that mimetic nature of I mean, a negative example of that was the hysteria that spread with this stupid pandemic and the lockdowns. Like that spread quicker than I think. I don't think this kind of hysteria could have spread, and it didn't for prior so-called pandemics, whether it was the swine flu, H1N1, whatever the fuck they were in the past. Like I think the perfect storm was able to transpire this year because of the convergence of social media, of multiple platforms, of the way mainstream media now is really just a branch of social media. Like mainstream media doesn't do their own fucking research anymore. They just read tweets.
Which is
Like
pretty
read.
fucking funny.
It's hilarious. It's like in the beginning it's like, oh yeah, this stuff's not funny, and now like the main segment on news is, oh, and this person tweeted. It's like, talk about a fucking inversion. So I think the mimetic nature of Bitcoin in particular as well, and the Bitcoiners themselves, who we've sort of become like the meme lords of the world in many ways.
Oh
I
yeah,
think
like our game is like top tier above everything else. It's pretty powerful to watch it
seriously, it's
happen.
fucking hilarious. So I think that by its very nature, I think, like you said, it would not surprise me if we're having that conversation earlier. I think that possibility really exists because never underestimate how quickly a tide can shift, or the momentum can shift. The momentum is a strange beast. Like Trump in his early days. Like I think, what was one of his earlier books that he wrote long before he wrote the one with Kiyosaki? It was something like The Art of the Deal or something like that. I remember reading
Mhm.
that when I was like 19 years old or whatever, like 15 years ago. And he talks about momentum in there as something that you want on your side, and you can do so much more when you have some momentum. And it's one of those things that you should strive never to lose, because once you've got momentum, you can overcome just about any odds. But once you lose the momentum, you're in shit. And Bitcoin, just by its very nature, it's something that doesn't seem to ever lose momentum, because it's this self-reinforcing thing that no matter what is thrown at it, it just keeps developing momentum. And that nature uh, really lends itself to the possibility of a of a viral spread through the world that nobody expects. And I mean, you'd be like, all the one thing I'm sure of is that this next decade is going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before. uh
Oh
what
yeah,
Yeah,
and I mean, like,
what happens, I don't know, but yeah.
I was just gonna say, like, think of dudes who were like living in the year 1770,
mm,
and
mm,
then they got to the year 1800, and like how fucking crazy and radically different the entire planet looked in that 30-year period. Like, they didn't have any, they had to get on a ship and fucking sail, for 6 weeks and have a bunch of
mm,
people die of dysentery and shit to like facilitate any of that. And the fact that you and me are literally a world apart having this conversation now, like, I think things are going to accelerate much, much quicker. And I think as Bitcoin sort of leads as a harbinger into the next great financial crisis, sort of the collapses of the fiat regimes, I do think that a very new and powerful political framework is going to assemble itself, where we will get to see all of these revolutionary changes happen relatively quickly and fluidly, because there's been this framework that's built this secret war that's happening on both sides. And I
mm,
think we're going
mm.
to find the Fight Club nature of things happening, where when we think serious conflict's going to go down, a bunch of people will kind of melt up and be like, hey, what's up? Like, we happen to have like settled the charges, like the everybody's evacuated. Like, I really hope that there will be a day that like we like march on the Fed, we like arrive to like blow up the thing, and they're like, hey, what's up? Like, hi. Like, everybody's evacuated from the building, like it's totally safe, like nobody's gonna get hurt. We're like collapsing the system, and we'll be like, oh, like, how did that happen? And they'll be
Yeah,
like, you made it happen. And we're like, what?
yeah. Is there any final comments on your part that you want to add, or
No, like, it's just fun connecting with you, and I know we've been kind of circling around each other, so I'm happy that we finally got a chance to sat down and talk. And yeah, I just love connecting with other Bitcoiners, because it helps motivate and instill so much more in me of realizing, like, this is all true. It's all actually happening. It's not like
yeah,
my
we're
own
on the
crazy
right path?
fantasy in my head.
Yep,
Yeah,
yep.
and like, it's super awesome that there's a solidarity that we share that we've never met in meet space. But yeah, when we do meet in meet space, it'll be this, brotherly connection
Hmm.
that we'll get to actually share and celebrate. And like, I'm so excited for like the next time that we all get together at a big celebration, because it's going to be this extremely profound and powerful moment where like we all get to solidify in reality the realness of what we're creating and doing together.
Yeah, man. I genuinely I could not echo that more, and I look forward to that day as well. It's been it's going to be meaningful on so many levels because we've been so separated from everyone for so long, and I think it's forced us to build depth in these connections at a distance. So when that distance disappears and we can act like humans again, I think it's going to be extra profound. So yeah, man, thank you sincerely for coming on, and obviously for contributing to the Bitcoin Times and just all the broader work you do. I think it really means a lot, man.
Thank you. I really appreciate hearing that, and likewise, I love seeing your comments and your writing and the various interviews that you do, and it's so fun that we're like participating in this truly global revolutionary vanguard to like not just end fiat money in one state, but in like all states, and to help lead the world into this beautiful enlightenment around what it means to have a money that can't be unilaterally taken.
For sure, for sure. All right, my man. Thank you
All right.
again.
Well, thank you so much. And yeah, I'll see you in the near future. Be well.
Absolutely.